Welcome to another TSE single slider. Today's slide is focused on webhooks that wait. Most of the time, events sent to webhook endpoints are just an FYI, but there are a few exceptions where Stripe waits for a response. In some special situations, Stripe's behavior is actually governed by the response or lack of response we get back from the webhook endpoints we send events to. Let's dive into our first example, checkout success redirects. We'll start with a customer who successfully completes checkout. When that happens, we send a checkout session completed event to the webhook endpoints listening for that event before we redirect the customer. Normally, the webhook endpoints will acknowledge the delivery of the event in a timely manner, and upon doing so, the customer is redirected to the success URL defined on the checkout session. However, this doesn't always happen. If one or more of the relevant webhook endpoints the event was sent to do not acknowledge the event in a timely manner, the customer won't be redirected to the success URL. We wait up to 10 seconds for a response from all of the relevant webhook endpoints before timing out and redirecting anyway. The reason we wait for acknowledgement of the checkout session completed event before redirecting the customer to the success URL is so the merchant has an opportunity to render a success page that reflects the successful checkout session completion. They can do things like update their database, trigger fulfillment, and so on prior to the customer hitting the success page. This allows for a very nice user experience. If the merchant knows the customer successfully paid before checkout redirects to the success URL, they can make sure the customer can access what they bought or see specific details immediately. Note that all of the account's own webhook endpoints which listen for checkout session completed events must always acknowledge the events before the redirect will happen. But if the checkout session was created by a Connect platform, that platform's Connect webhook endpoints must also acknowledge the event as well. Thus, if a user is reporting unusually long checkout redirect delays, make sure you check both account and Connect webhook endpoints if a platform created the checkout session. Let's move on to our second example, subscription invoice finalization. We'll start with a subscription that creates an invoice with automatic collection enabled. When this happens, we send an invoice created event, wait for successful webhook responses, and then we finalize the invoice and attempt payment roughly an hour after all successful responses have been received. But what happens if we don't get a successful response from one or more webhook endpoints? We wait 72 hours. That's right, 72 hours. If we're unable to connect to one of the webhook endpoints listening for invoice created events, the event delivery request times out, or we receive a response that indicates the event was not delivered successfully, we will retry event delivery several times until we do get a successful response, or until 72 hours has elapsed before finalizing the invoice. This delay exists because we want to give the merchant an opportunity to alter draft invoices generated asynchronously by subscriptions before they're finalized. Modifying these invoices is critical for some merchants, so to allow for situations like unexpected downtime or maintenance on their end, we wait for the full live mode webhook delivery retry window to elapse before proceeding, which is 72 hours. Note that this behavior does not apply to synchronous invoice payment attempts, like the first invoice created for a new subscription, or when certain updates to a subscription are made that generate an invoice immediately. Also note that all account webhook endpoints and Connect webhook endpoints belonging to platforms with write permissions must respond with success to these events to avoid a delay. If even one of them fails to respond with success, we will not proceed with finalization and payment. Thus, if you find yourself investigating an invoice that's not being finalized as expected, make sure you check all the webhook endpoints listening for invoice created events. Okay. Let's look at our final example, real-time issuing authorizations. This time we're going to start with a transaction attempt using a Stripe issuing card. If the Stripe account this card was issued by has set up real-time authorizations, we send them an issuing authorization request event. Once they receive the event, they need to make one of two API calls to either approve or deny the authorization, then respond to the event delivery. After that, the transaction will be handled according to the API request they made. In this scenario, the user needs to build a fast integration. We only give them 2 seconds to approve or deny the authorization and respond to the event delivery request before we time out and use whatever timeout settings they've configured in their dashboard. This system allows issuing users to run their own custom authorization logic on every transaction as they happen, but in order to provide a good experience to everyone involved, there's a very small window of time for that logic to run. So those are 3 situations where Stripe waits for a webhook before proceeding. Sometimes we wait for a few seconds, as shown in the checkout and issuing examples, and sometimes we wait for several hours, as shown in the billing example. Regardless of how long we wait, this behavior can be a real surprise if you don't know about it. Remember to keep these special cases in mind when working with webhooks, checkout, invoices, and issuing.